Welcome. You're listening to The Weather Lounge, a podcast by WeatherWorks. Get ready to explore the world of weather and connect with engaging guests, bringing you fun and thought-provoking stories of just how weather shapes our lives, sometimes in ways you've never imagined. So, join us as we unravel the mysteries of the atmosphere. Today's episode starts right now.
Well, hello, friends, and welcome back to the Weather Lounge. I'm your host, meteorologist Brad Miller, and our podcast comes to you from our WeatherWorks headquarters here in Hackettstown, New Jersey. And joining me in the Weather Lounge is fellow WeatherWorks meteorologist Jen Diorio. Hello there, Jen.
Hey, Brad. Good to be here on the podcast today. And you know what? We're going to talk about every weather enthusiast's favorite four-letter word today.
I think I have a good idea. To start with an S and end with Mr. Slezak, Joe.
Yes, you got it, Brad. We're here to talk about snow. So here's the plan. We're going to discuss the most memorable snowstorms that have occurred in the Northeast, and we're going to break it down by month, starting with October and ending with April.
Yeah, we're in the throes of winter here, Jen, and of course, we all love a good nor'easter. I mean, all the kid in us, although we're working hard then, but it's always different when you got a nor'easter and you got a big snowstorm here, especially along the I-95 corridor. So, from the forecasting side and the observer slash weenie side, it's always a big event, especially here at WeatherWorks. So, and we're gonna need some help with this one, Jen. And when we break down, all these snowstorms, we're gonna need someone else to join us here, and that's our Weather Lounge producer and fellow meteorologist Mike Priante. Mike's here to chat along with us.
That's right. I am here. And, I thought of this topic. I could have sworn, Brad and I were talking about this. I thought we talked about memorable snowstorms, but we might not have actually done it on the Weather Lounge, which is an interesting thing because I might be losing it, but I thought we did. But it's good here that we're all here together now to talk about it because I'm telling you, I have a couple storms that I remember for sure. One in particular that was probably my best snowstorm ever. So I'm looking forward to talking about that one.
I think we were going to do this with Mike Mahalik as well. Still part of the Weather Lounge, but we of course have Jen on today, our favorite co-host as well. But anyway,
Brad's like, no, we want Mike back. I don't want
no,
Jen. No,
we
that's
like Mike. But I think you're right though. I think we had everything prepared to do it, and then for some reason it kind of slipped through the cracks. We probably got busy or something, and so we figured we'd just go back and look back at some of these snowstorms.
I think when we think about snowstorms, you think about it happening in December, January, February. But snow can happen, well, mostly in the wintertime, but in the fall as well. And Jen, I think you have a snowstorm that many people in the Northeast remember back in October. Is that right?
Yes, we are talking about the 2011 Halloween nor'easter. So that's where we're going to kick off. So yeah, this nor'easter produced widespread snowfall across the Northeast and the Canadian Maritimes, and also produced hurricane strength winds along the coast. There was even a close to 70-mile-an-hour wind gust recorded in coastal Massachusetts. The snowfall broke records in at least 20 cities for total accumulations. For this storm itself, the highest recorded snowfall was 32 inches in the town of Peru, Massachusetts. A little closer to home in New Jersey, we had 19 inches in West Milford, which broke the state's record for the highest snowfall in October.
Yeah, those are stout storms just for the middle of winter. Never mind Halloween.
Right. Yes, for sure. So quite a lot of snow. The other thing that was notable about this was it was just 2 months after Hurricane Irene, which caused extensive property damage and power outages. So because of already all of that going on from Irene, and then just 2 months later, we see this massive nor'easter that was definitely, some additional vulnerability. And another 1 to 3 million, 1 to 3, hold on, let me start that over because I feel like I was stuttering. All right, 3, 2, 1. An estimated $1 to $3 billion in damage resulted on top of what we already saw damage cost wise from Hurricane Irene, which is really crazy. And the biggest problem with this, which we see quite a lot when we're forecasting, late fall, early winter snowstorms here at WeatherWorks, is fallen, fully leafed trees can cause a lot of damage when they start to see a bunch of snow and then and they fall down. So that was the biggest cause of all of the damage and the power outages. And speaking of power outages, there was over 3 million people that didn't have power, and the worst was in Connecticut, and that lasted up to 11 days in some spots.
Well, the good thing is I didn't have school, so I'm okay with that. I remember that day because I didn't have school, and actually because our school lost power, down trees and everything, so I didn't have school for I think more than a day, which was weird because like you said, October snow, early snow doesn't last very long. The sun angle usually gets rid of it pretty quickly. So with this snowstorm, we had no school, and yet, you go outside and all the snow was gone. Because I think it was only like, it wasn't 19 inches of snow, but it wasn't also like a coating. It was like a couple inches. It was enough to bring down branches on power lines, trees. So we had no power. Power was out, but it was eerie because it was almost like, did a hurricane hit? No, it was, it was a snowstorm. But you wouldn't know it a day or two after because it's like you had to have some sort of evidence to convince anyone that, oh, yeah, it snowed yesterday. Like, no, it didn't snow yesterday. Yeah, it did. It's what it looked like
Right.
back then. So,
Yep, exactly. So yeah, that was a pretty massive storm for just, like Brad said, Halloween time. So
All right, well then let's move on to November, and I'll talk about, well, before I talk about the storm that really impacted the I-95 corridor, and a good portion of the Northeast. That actually occurred on November the 27th, I guess 26th into the 27th, but we'll come back to that in a minute. Before I talk about that, I want to talk about earlier in the month, middle month, more like November 14th, 15th, 16th, in there. It was a separate storm. But what happened was it was a massive, massive lake effect dump of snow. Now, we just had one of these a couple of years ago. In fact, was it 2022, I believe?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, well, we had like the 70 inches somewhere just southeast of Buffalo. But anyway, this one was of close strength of that one, but it occurred over a 3-day period. And the bands of snow set up, basically in narrow areas like they do with typical lake effect events. But this one lasted about 3 days, and it produced snowfall on the order of 4 to 5 feet. Now, again, we saw this just as recently as 2022, but really this one seems like it impacted more places. Um, the the Bills' home stadium, they had to move the game. I think they had to do that in 2022 as well with these lake effect storms. So just something that I think what made this one so, I guess, stands out so much because it's so early in the year. I mean, it was middle of November. Granted, yeah, we can snow then and you get some lake effect, but not to this extent. And this one just sat on top of parts of Western New York for days. The maximum snowfall recorded was 88 inches, and that was in Cowlsville, in New York. So it's crazy. The funny thing, I don't want to say funny thing, maybe the odd thing about this storm though that I researched is in August of 2015. Mind you, this is 9 months after the November storm. There was a spike in the number of babies born in Buffalo, New York.
Hmm.
So
No one can leave, and watching a football game.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean, hey, crazy things happen, right?
yeah. I mean, the hospital says reported an increase of 6 new babies a day to as many as 16, with expectations of 25 to 30% increase in births by the end of the month. So
No, definitely a coincidence, right? I mean, it can't be 9 months. No, no.
I just for some reason I saw that it was kind of funny, odd, you know, quip from that one. So fun fact, I guess.
It's interesting the Bills they play in such a crazy environment up in Buffalo because I mean and they don't want to have a domed stadium. I mean, I know the new one that's being that is it finished? I don't know if it's finished yet or if it's still if it's on its way, but I know the new one is not going to be covered either. So it's interesting because any other place would be like, no, we want a dome, we want a covered stadium because you'd avoid all that. But no, if they get 50, 60 inches of snow, they'll get the shovelers out and they'll shovel the stadium like they did last time. So
Yeah, no, it's I think it adds to their, their home quote home field advantage maybe. So
they call them the Bills Mafia. They
Yeah.
come out in droves to help shovel out the stadium. So I mean,
yeah.
they've got a good base of people to help out. So I mean, they can do it. That's great. But yeah, it's certainly crazy to see.
So moving on to the storm I actually really wanted to talk about though, because the one that impacted the Northeast especially, it happened on Thanksgiving Eve of 2014. Now again, I was down south. I don't know if you guys remember this one. So it would have been a little over 10 years ago. Um, but it was November 26th into the 27th, which the 27th was Thanksgiving. So it was a white Thanksgiving up and down the entire eastern seaboard. It The worst part of it was actually the travel because that Wednesday, most people when they travel and airports and roads and trains and everything got snarled because of the snow. And again, it wasn't like a huge snowstorm where it was like 2 to 3 feet, but you know, it was enough to cause a lot of problems, especially inland. But even Central Park in New York City, these areas saw a good 3 to 6 inches. Of course, as you go inland, that amounts came up quickly. For example, you had like Sussex County had almost 9 inches in Wantage. Vernon had about 7.5 inches. And these amounts kind of went all the way up into Connecticut and Massachusetts. One of those rain changing the snow events, and then as the storm strengthened, it still really snowed hard at night, and then that was it. But just the timing of the storm was really bad for the Northeast.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember if I remember this storm. It probably wasn't a lot of snow for me, but I mean, either that or maybe I was at home or sorry, in college at the time, but I don't know.
Yeah, it was just the timing of it. I mean, it was bad, and it was forecasted well. I mean, everyone knew it was coming. That it was rain going to change over to snow, and then
Yeah, it's just that travel
the
day is
timing was horrible. Yeah.
really, really
So,
tough.
but I
Yep.
guess it made for a nice Thanksgiving. You don't get too many white Thanksgivings
White
in
Thanksgivings,
the
exactly.
Northeast. Curious. Yeah, I'm curious to see what the Christmas weather was like, and if it was like a green Christmas and a white Thanksgiving that year. But
Well, sometimes early snows, in the season sometimes lead to more warmer patterns. So, like,
yeah,
if you
you're
get
right.
snow in October, snow in December, it's not like it's not going to happen. But a lot of the times when you see early snow, you can sometimes have a bit of like a lull occur. Maybe something later on in the season. Again, winter is all the way through sometimes March for many places. So, it's not like it can't happen, but sometimes early snow is nice, but also not good because if you want more snow later on, maybe it ends up being a little bit of a well, we had some snow and it's been 2 months now. Now everyone's like, I want snow because once you get the first snow, you're like, yeah, I want more snow, and it just gets everyone antsy. I think. Um,
Yep, that can happen for sure.
So I guess Mike's next. He's got a fun one. The Boxing Day blizzard, right?
Yeah, first of all, I'm not from Canada. I don't know what Boxing Day exactly is. When I heard this a long time ago, I was like, what are they doing boxing on this day? Of course, me as an American not having any idea what it means. And it's also interesting that we even in the U.S. Because a lot of the impacts were also in the U.S. That we still call it the Boxing Day blizzard, even though we don't really celebrate Boxing Day in the U.S. But again,
It's
it's
the
the
day
day
after
after.
Christmas, correct?
It's the
Yes.
I believe it's the day after Christmas. But this originally started. This storm started out all the way. Well, all the way out in California. A wave kind of developed and moved across California. And then sort of like energy from California then dove down into the Gulf of Mexico. And what's interesting about this system is that and this was back in I should say back in 2010, and I was just a young lad in high school, early in my meteorological career, and I remember all the meteorologists were really trying to figure out what was going to happen after Christmas. The models were hinting at some sort of development off of Georgia, off of the Gulf Coast, or the southeastern coast, I should say. But most of them ended up having it be a flat storm because there was high pressure to the north. I think there was too much blocking, and it ended up suppressing the storm. Wasn't able to really get itself going. And if you know any snowstorms on the East Coast, out the sea storms. This was an out the sea storm initially. But what happened was, I believe a day prior to the snowstorm developing, this was on Christmas Day, um, in the morning, I believe they sent out planes, hurricane hunters actually go into
Oh, really?
snowstorms. Yes.
To sample?
They sample the air. Yes. They sent dropsondes, which are basically these packages they send from the plane, and it goes all the way through the atmosphere, and then it lands in the ocean. And what that does is it allows them to really, see all the layers of the atmosphere. Basically, it's like a sounding, if you think about it. A sounding is essentially looking at the atmosphere from
This
like a
was an
kind of a
impromptu
two-dimensional view.
sounding.
Yeah, it was impromptu. This was all impromptu because the models were really not handling it well. Because I think originally there were some models that were showing this big storm, but then it backed off again. So they sent the sample in, and then that got injected into all the models, and then lo and behold, the next run, it all showed a major storm off the East Coast. And I mean, that wasn't something that no one expected initially because it was an option on the table, like a week out. It was a potential. The pattern was great. I mean, that was one of the best patterns for a big snowstorm. You had really good blocking. The NAO was negative. All the teleconnections across the globe were perfect for a storm. The problem is it just showed too much blocking and it showed too much suppression, and the storm didn't phase in time, phasing with energy. But they did that. They sent the planes in, and then on the 26th, or sorry, the 25th, all of a sudden, New York City went from basically having nothing to a blizzard watch, and it was insane. It was really insane. This storm was basically a winter hurricane. It deepened into 961 millibars. Which is equivalent, to a strong hurricane, like a major hurricane, low end major hurricane. And it's insane because a lot of the blocking developed, and it ended up just really just doing a number on the East Coast. And then it just continued. I mean, this storm continued all the way. It went all the way into Canada, and it eventually made its way to the British Islands, and then
Wow.
into Norway and
Wow.
Russia. And at that point, it wasn't like a big snowstorm. I mean, it certainly had some wintry aspects, but the main thing was, again, you think about it, it was basically like a hurricane, and it kind of got absorbed. And this is like all the way into like early January. So this storm impacted a lot of places, not just here in the U.S. and Canada, but all the way into Europe. So it was a really, really major storm that developed.
This is one of the earliest snowstorms that I remember. I was in 6th grade at the time. And yeah, I remember like we would always have family from out of town come in, kind of around Christmas for like, a little Christmas get together and whatnot. And I remember everyone coming in like Christmas night, and then this storm kind of coming out of nowhere. And then the 2 days after that, instead of doing our normal like Christmas gathering with like friends and family, we were all just kind of like hunkered down. And I mean, we had our own, fun, and it was very obviously memorable, but it was crazy that, everyone came in thinking that everything was going to be fine. And then boom, all of a sudden this happened. I remember the wind, especially on Long Island being a huge, like, it's probably in recent memory the most windy conditions I've ever seen with snow.
Oh yeah, winds were really bad in this. The top
Yeah,
wind though
especially
was
out on
recorded.
Long Island. Yeah.
I was gonna say the top wind was actually recorded in Canada, in Nova Scotia, 94 miles per hour.
Ooh.
That was a
Wow.
wind gust. Long Island had some gusts over 60 and sustained 30 to 45. So this was a blizzard. And we actually did an episode, Brad, if you remember, with Mike, on what a blizzard is. We did
Yeah, oh
the
yeah.
criteria. So if you want to listen to that, go back through our history and you'll find that. Because not every storm is a blizzard, even though they want to call it a blizzard. There's a criteria for it. But yeah, it was very windy. And snowfall wise, this was a big storm. I mean, I think across the New York City metro area, snow range from just under a half foot across western New Jersey all the way to like 2 feet. And some places got over 30 inches of snow. My house got, I think, like 28 inches, but I know across Brick, New Jersey, I believe had the most. I think that was 32 inches of
Wow,
snow,
that's
which
down near Ocean County. Ocean.
Yep, down toward the Jersey Shore. Got 32 inches of snow, which is absolutely insane. How do you shovel that? How do you shovel 30? I mean, well, I should be asking the people up in, Buffalo, like, 32 inches? That's nothing. Try 70, you know? But yeah, it was insane. So that storm was just memorable for me for sure.
All right, I guess I'm gonna do the next two storms.
Yeah, it's time to go back. Now we're in January, Brad, and I think you have a good storm.
Well, no, actually, no. We're gonna stay in December. We got one more in December first. I'll just talk about this one kind of quick because it wasn't. It was a pretty big storm. It impacted all the Northeast, all the I-95 corridor. It was a storm that brought with it decent amounts of snow. I mean, for the most part, it was like a 6 to 12 incher for a good portion of I-95, even all the way up to Boston. However, the storm kind of slowed down and pivoted. Um, there was a dry slot that kind of developed over the I-95 corridor. That's why the amounts weren't as high as they were back inland. And when I say inland, I'm talking back into northern PA, Binghamton, into inland, interior New England as well. There was a band of snow that set up from northern Pennsylvania, went through Binghamton, went through just south of Albany, I believe, and into Vermont and eventually New Hampshire. I remember I was doing the certified snowfall total for this storm for Vermont and New Hampshire. And there was a band of snow, probably only about 20 to 30 miles wide. It basically produced 40 to 45 inches within this band within the day of the storm, within the storm,
Wow.
which the storm actually took 3 days. It was, or I guess, yeah, it was. I guess it was 3 days. It was basically from December 16th through the 18th. But if I know we're an audio podcast, but if you ever have a chance, go back and look at the visual of the snowfall amounts, and it's just it's amazing, and it just stands out on me because I remember it was the highest amount of snow I've ever given in a a certified snowfall total, which I think Lansdowne was like 40 something inches, which is crazy.
That's a lot of snow. I mean, especially for a storm that wasn't really uh, like lake effect.
Right, it wasn't lake effect. It was just a good old low pressure coming up the coast. It stalled out, and that deform band just set up over those areas, and it just sat there basically for like 48 hours and just snowed 2, 3, 4 inch amounts per hour for like a day or two, and it adds up quick. And it was just it was a memorable one for those folks. I just remember seeing the video coming out of Binghamton and those areas. I mean, you couldn't move up there for days. It was just crazy. And I just remember doing that storm, and it was just, yeah. Again, if you can get a visual and take a look at the snow map on that one, it's a pretty crazy gradient too. It basically goes from like 40 inches over Binghamton to like a foot or two as you get into northeastern PA. So
Yeah, and sorry for taking so much time away from you, Brad. I know you wanted to talk really about this storm, but hey, I'm just so mesmerized by the Boxing Day blizzard, and I think that it was such a big storm. No offense to Binghamton, but I
I
mean,
know.
I thought that was a big storm
Now
myself.
the Boxing Day, yeah, I mean anywhere, yeah, if you're from the I-95 corridor, anything over 2 feet is a huge storm, or anything over a foot usually now. But so the next storm I'm going to talk about, um, this was actually my first real big one working at WeatherWorks, because it was the winter of 2015, 2016. Of course, we had some snow before that, but this one just sticks in my mind because it was the first time that we actually got stranded. I got stranded in New Jersey. I'm from Pennsylvania, from the Poconos, so I was going back and forth. But this one, I got stuck in New Jersey for 2 days because we had all the work, and it was something that, it was just a thing that you'll never forget. It was the blizzard of January of 2016. It occurred from January 22nd to the 24th. I think both of you would remember that one because it was, a couple of years after the 2014 storm, obviously. But this one was an odd one because, like Mike was talking about with the models with the Boxing Day storm, this one was definitely going to be snow. It was very cold. The question was, is it going to be rain? Is it going to be snow? We're going to mix a lot. It was either going to be how much snow we're going to get, where's the cutoff? And basically, up until I guess the 21st, it kind of looked like most of the storm was going to miss a good portion of the I-95 corridor, and it was going to stay suppressed more to the south and be kind of a central Jersey south storm, even in down to D.C. But as we got closer to the day it started, model started to creep a little further north, and it got a little further north, and before you know it, we were basically, like Mike said, with the Boxing Day storm, we had a blizzard warning in effect for a good portion of New Jersey, all the way down I-95 through Philly, and this one produced up to 3 feet of snow across parts of the Northeast. I just remember this one because, again, we couldn't get back. The roads were closed. So we were at the office working, and then we'd go stay at a hotel, and we'd come back the next day, and we did that for 2 days. So it was just, it just sticks in my mind, that blizzard of 2016.
Yeah, I don't remember. I might remember that storm. I might have been in college, so I don't know if it
Right.
was.
Yeah, that's right, because you were in Penn State, and I don't think they got as much out there.
No, I think we got gypped
I don't
by
think
it.
out there I got got gypped. Yeah, I remember it pretty vividly on Long Island. I didn't have school for a day or two, and yeah, it was a pretty good one out here.
Yeah, some of the big totals were Morris Plains had the highest amount in New Jersey at 33 inches. Allentown had almost 32 inches.
Wow.
New York City, JFK had 30.5. LaGuardia had almost 28 inches. So Central Park had almost 28 inches also. So um, it was a memorable one. It was, I don't think, and this was my first storm moving back up north from being in South Carolina for a while. Of course, I grew up in the Northeast. I remember watching a lot of stuff, but this was the first big one again. And boy, it was just, you couldn't even move. It was nuts.
Yeah, I remember. Does anyone remember Nemo?
No, this was actually, well, if you want to give the name, yeah, the Weather Channel, this was
This
Jonas.
was Jonas.
Yeah, do you remember Nemo though?
Oh, yeah, I remember Nemo, though, too. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yes, and we're going to talk about Nemo in a couple minutes.
Yeah, it's funny that we remember these by those names.
Oh, so speaking of Nemo, Mike, that is our next storm. Jen's going to talk about that storm. That was a big one in 2013.
Yeah, Brad. So Nemo was pretty memorable for me at being on Long Island in 2013. I'll get to that in a second, but just overall, it brought some heavy snowfall to the Northeast as well as hurricane force winds along the coast. The highest snowfall of the storm was located at Hamden, Connecticut, with 40 inches recorded. So that's a pretty big amount there. Boston recorded 24.9 inches, which was the fifth highest snow total ever recorded in the city. And Central Park was at almost a foot. Now, on Long Island, like I said, it was pretty memorable for me. Reason being was we got over 2 feet for much of Long Island. The town right next to mine, Medford, New York, recorded 33.5 inches. Yeah, that was the highest total on Long Island. Yeah. Um, but I think what made it, really stick out and why, it remains such a kind of notorious storm several years later is the biggest thing was that the snow came really fast and furious, and people were really unprepared for that. And there's actually a famous picture if you look up like Winter Storm Nemo, of just hundreds of cars just stranded on the LIE, and what happened. the good old LIE. And what happened on the expressway was that people were driving. It was during the afternoon / evening rush hour. People were driving home from work, and all of a sudden it just started absolutely dumping snow, and people's cars either stalled or they just felt like they couldn't drive in it, and they literally just abandoned their cars. And over 20 miles of the LIE was closed for several days, which is really kind of unheard of, and that was for further snow removal, but also just removing cars and trying to find owners and all of that. So, that was incredibly notable. For me, it was freshman year of high school for me. And I went to a private Catholic school, which is on the South Shore of Long Island. And all of us at WeatherWorks know, and just, for our listeners, that even though Long Island is literally a 120-mile long island, there is actually some subtle differences in the weather that can happen, especially in the winter, and some subtle elevation changes. The South Shore is a lot closer to sea level, where there are portions of the North Shore that are anywhere. I mean, the highest point in Long Island is like 500 feet. Yeah, but the North Shore, can range from, 1 to like 300, kind of something around there is more typical. But you would think, okay, that's not too dramatic of a difference, but in a lot of cases it can be with the rain snow line. And so what happened was I was in my, ninth grade class, whatever, doing my thing, and they dismissed school like an hour or two early, nothing crazy, and we're starting on the bus on the way home. And then as soon as we crossed over the LIE, which is the pretty big, like, north to south divider of the island, as soon as we crossed over to the north, it just started absolutely dumping snow. And that's similar to what happened to a lot of people who got stranded on the LIE. We were really struggling with, getting home. And it took my normal bus ride, which was about an hour and a half, 8 hours to get back to my house. My minibus got stuck at the foot of my driveway. My dad and our neighbor helped push the minibus out, and she eventually got everyone home. She was such a trooper after 12 hours, but it was pretty crazy how dramatic the difference from south to north was, and that was probably one of the scariest experiences, like, in a motor vehicle that I've ever had, because it was really looking like harrowing that we were going to get back, because the snow was just accumulating so quickly. So yeah, it was a pretty crazy one, that's for sure.
Yeah, I'm looking at the image, Jen, that you described, that famous image of all the cars just kind of just out there, not being able to be moved, just.
It's a little apocalyptic, like.
It
Yeah.
is. I mean, I don't.
Didn't that happen in Chicago too, though, on Lakeshore Drive with the storm?
Was it the blizzard of 70? It was in the 70s, right? Was it
Yeah,
the
maybe it was
Groundhog
in the
Day
70s.
blizzard,
I
I
remember
think?
something like that
It
happened.
might have been the
Maybe,
Groundhog
yeah.
Day blizzard, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's what it was, the Groundhog Day blizzard, yeah.
But there also was another instance of like cars that were just kind of stranded. I mean, I already talked about it, but the Boxing Day blizzard,
Yeah.
I believe caused just a lot of problems for New York City. I mean, there's a lot of snow that fell in that area, and sometimes you get 2 feet of snow, and it's tough for these snowplows to kind of go in, especially when people are on the road and they don't get their cars off, and it's just you really can't hit cars with a snowplow.
No.
Yeah.
So
And those snow rates, I'm sure that's what did it. I mean, you get,
that
2,
too,
3 inches
yeah.
an hour,
Yeah.
and you're on a major highway where you got, a couple 100,000 people probably. It's
And I think the other problem is it's accumulate. Like, I remember vividly, like, looking at the tires of the bus and being like, oh my God, like, it's coming so fast. Like, it's just, slowly rising above, like, not slowly rising above the tires, but like, it was just, it was steadily rising. That's a better word. But because everyone was in normal New York rush hour traffic, which everyone's probably like, Jen, rush hour traffic in New York is all day long. Yes, I would agree, but it's especially between like the hours of like 2 to like 7 or 8 o'clock. That was there was a lot of traffic, so there was a lot of like very slow moving or standstill. And because people weren't really moving, that was another big problem, was as the snow is rapidly accumulating and now people aren't really moving, that allowed, people's vehicles to kind of like stall more and not really be able to get traction on the rapidly accumulating snow. I think if it was just people moving kind of at a normal, 55-mile-an-hour speed limit that's on the LIE, even though no one drives that, everyone goes faster. But I think if people were moving at that speed, there would have been less people like stranded because they just, already had that momentum from the moving car. So it was kind of just the perfect storm of things to not be great, and everyone being out on the road, given that, like, I think because of the dramatic north to south difference, everyone on the north that was, staying on the north kind of already hunkered down, whereas everyone on the south was just like living life as if nothing was happening because it was just a rain snow mix at that point. So people were out on the road more readily and longer than usual, I feel like, during a snow event. So
that happened just a couple of years ago, even in North Jersey. Remember that one storm in 17, when it just came in, it just snowed so fast, and you remember a lot of folks got stuck. I mean, it wasn't as big as that one, but I mean the snow rates were incredible, and it was late in the afternoon, and I think there was like thousands of cars stuck on the New Jersey Turnpike and the Parkway. I think it was like in November of 2017 too. It was an
It was
early
an
season
early
snowstorm.
season storm, Brad, and I remember it because I was actually off that day, thankfully from work.
Yeah.
But it means I didn't have to go anywhere. But I do remember because it was kind of almost like the perfect, and I want to say perfect, but the worst concoction you can get. Heavy snow falling in November during rush hour, especially when, number one, there's barely any salt on the roads because they haven't been salting yet. It's November. And the plows and everything are kind of like still in their infancy. They're not like fully ready to go. It just was a disaster from all aspects.
And for anyone that believes, oh, it's too warm to snow, it's too warm to stick in November. No, 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 it doesn't matter. If those rates are high enough, it'll stick in any month almost.
Well, I'll tell you, Brad, one storm that wasn't warm, or at least wasn't a early season storm, was the Snowmageddon storm of 2010. Interestingly enough, Snowmageddon, also known as Snowpocalypse, was probably one of Maryland's biggest snowstorms in almost 10 plus years. I mean, it's honestly, I'll tell you the numbers in a little bit, but a lot of places picked up over 2 feet of snow. This was essentially their version of the Boxing Day blizzard in the Northeast, or Nemo in the Northeast. This was their version. It all started basically with a system that kind of moved out from the west. It was a Miller B type storm. So you had a storm kind of forming over the Ohio Valley. It started to become a little more phased with an upper level system, and it developed a secondary low off to kind of like, or actually not a secondary low, but it kind of developed more to the south as there was blocking to the north. And that allowed a lot of the moisture and a lot of the storm to kind of almost uncharacteristically stay south. And another thing with this storm was that if you were anywhere north of New York City, you basically saw almost nothing, if at all.
Gradient was crazy on that storm.
Right, high pressure was so dominant, the block, and that's why Maryland got a big snowstorm out of this, the Mid-Atlantic, so to speak, because the block was so far south and strong that New York City saw a trace of snow in Central Park. They saw a trace of snow in Central Park. Meanwhile, D.C. itself saw about 28 inches. Yeah, now that wasn't even the highest. The highest was actually in Howard. I believe it was in Howard County, 2 miles west of Elk Ridge, Maryland. They saw 38 inches of snow. 38 inches of snow. And again, that's pretty much what is that, over 2 feet of snow, over 3 feet of snow, which is insane to think about. But again, it's one of those big storms, and I remember it because again, it was probably the biggest storm they've had in a long time. And it shut down everything. I mean, you think the South, like, they can't handle snow? I mean, Maryland couldn't handle snow in this storm. I remember when they basically, like, everything, the metro got shut down. And just for reference, the metro is underground, right? They shut that down. Every single type of system that they had in place for like transit was all gone. I mean, the government shut down pretty much for a day or two. I mean, it was kind of like almost, if you looked at it, it was almost very similar to, like I said, Boxing Day. I mean, everything got shut down, and really people were not able to get to where they had to go. There were, people that were cross country skiing in the streets, and the plows weren't out there because they weren't able to get there in time. And again, Maryland and snow they don't really mix, and I'm sure Jen would know that from forecasting down there. They don't really mix as well.
No, they do not. And I'm also thinking to myself as you're saying all this, will I ever need to forecast that amount of snow in Maryland in the near future? As we head into this winter, you never know.
You never know. And it's almost like, oh, it's almost time for them to get a big storm again. I mean, really, yes, because 2010, again, was over 14 years ago was this storm occurred. Almost 15 years in next year, February 2025 will be 15-year anniversary, which is insane to think about, of the Snowmageddon storm. So, I mean, obviously, looking at climatology, those areas aren't supposed to be getting big storms like that, so it's more of an anomaly, but you never know. I mean, eventually, they're going to get some snow again. Maybe it won't be 30 or 40 inches, but it'll be a foot, and they'll have to deal with it, so.
And of course, Mike, there's been several Maryland big storms and mid-Atlantic storms. Megalopolitan, I think it was called, the snowstorm in 1983. I have kind of looked that one up, but that was a biggie for just about the entire I-95 corridor. The President's Day storm too. I wasn't really alive yet, but it's going back to February. But it's like a 3-day storm, and again, that was another big one for the I-95 corridor, including the Mid-Atlantic. So, I mean, again, February, that's the heart of all these storms. Now, March, we all know, is a very volatile month when it comes to the Northeast and even New England, Mid-Atlantic. You can have a day, even getting to near 70 degrees, little taste of spring, and then bam, snowstorm. Now, the superstorm in 93, that was one storm that I remember really well. It's actually called the storm of the century. This one was actually a Miller A storm, as opposed to Mike was just talking about the Miller B when it comes across the Ohio Valley, then redevelops off the Mid-Atlantic somewhere. This one is one of those full latitude storms where it comes out of basically the energy is kind of a split flow pattern. It's you got one piece coming in from the northwest, you got another piece coming from the southwestern U.S., and these two kind of got together down mainly around like Louisiana, and then a storm just blew up, and it was a storm, like you said, the storm of the century. And this one basically produced snow from Maine all the way down to the panhandle of Florida. It snowed in Florida with this one. I think Mount Mitchell got the most snow. That was in, of course, North Carolina. I think they were like 56 inches of snow or something like that, but it was just an incredible storm. But I remember this one because I was just getting into college, and I remember just we didn't have the computer technology like we do now. Everything was on printer, everything was on paper, and we were watching. I remember every little line of the printer, showed the next model run, and we're going back to like old LFM, old GFS stuff. There was no, I guess there was a European model then, but there was no NAM, there was no HER and things like that. It was called ADA, I remember. That was an old one, but this storm basically went up the East Coast, and it produced a ton of snow, and basically shut down the eastern half of the United States for a good at least 2, maybe 3 days in some places. Yeah, it was a storm that there was a good gradient with the snow. I mean, there were some coastal areas that kind of missed out because the storm was so strong. It pulled in so much warm air right along the coast itself, but right on the backside of the storm, I mean, there were 2-3 foot amounts as far south as like northern Alabama, the mountains of Georgia, North Carolina, Virginia. I mean, it was just it was a far-reaching storm, and not only that, not only did it produce blizzard conditions and tons of snow. it produced severe weather. There was a nasty squall line that came across the Gulf of Mexico and produced a lot of tornadoes, straight line winds. I mean, there were wind gusts above 100 miles per hour with the line of storms that blew through Florida with this one. Unfortunately, there was a surge also, a tidal surge. There were people that died in Florida because of the severe weather, unfortunately. Um, but it was just a storm of the century. It's basically the easiest way to describe it. And I'm sure a lot of listeners will remember it, but it was back on March the 12th, 1993, and it basically didn't even exit the U.S. until the 14th. So, like a 48 to 72-hour storm across a good portion of the United States. Got all the way down to 960 millibars. You imagine that?
Sounds like a hurricane to me, Brad. I don't know about you.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It was power outages were over like 10 million. Um, Damage back then it was 5.5 billion. So can you imagine 5.5 billion in 1993? What that would equal to now? It's
Probably
just
like, I don't know,
probably at
15
least
billion
triple
maybe.
that.
Who
Yeah.
knows?
I mean, it was, but of course, if you want more information, you just Google Storm of the Century. But a lot of folks remember that one, and it was a well forecasted storm, by the way. So that was the one good thing about it is um, models were sniffing this thing out days, even a week ahead of time. I mean, everyone knew, meteorologists knew there was going to be a big storm up along the East Coast. All the exact tracks, of course, took a little time to get exact, but everyone knew there was going to be a big storm that comes out of the Gulf and goes up the eastern seaboard, and it happened. And it's the biggest storm I can remember. We actually got stuck. They canceled classes for 3 days at Millersville for that one, just because nobody could move. I mean, and snow removal wasn't the same back in early 90s as it is now. So think about that. I mean, yeah, we had plows and stuff, of course, like that, but kind of aging myself here, but it's not as good. I mean, snow removal today is so much different than even like 20 years ago. And I know you guys even know that going back to your early days and just working at WeatherWorks. And we talked to all the EPWs and things like that.
Yeah, no, I mean, snowfall removal has come a long way since
Oh
the
yeah,
90s, that's for
yeah, it
sure.
has. But yeah, if you need more information, I mean, there's YouTubes on it. I mean, it was a ridiculous storm. Um, that one there in 1993, the superstorm of '93. I think actually a couple days before that, it was in the 60s. It was beautiful up and down the East Coast, and people were like, "Ah, spring's here," and all the forecasts were coming out. No, there's going to be a substantial snowstorm, significant snowstorm for the East Coast here in the next couple of days. So and it happened.
Yeah, so as this was the snowstorm of the century, the snowstorm of the other century is the one I'm going to be talking about
Yeah.
next, because we're leaving the 1990s and we're going into the 1880s.
Oh
You might have
gosh.
remembered this storm, Brad. I don't know. Maybe you have.
No, no, no. That's a little too old.
But no, I kid. But yeah, this is the Great Blizzard of 1888. And this was also a March storm. And interestingly enough, as well as all these like or late season storms in March and April, the weather was actually fairly mild ahead of the storm.
It seems like that with a lot of March storms, except for March of 2018 when we had like what 4 nor'easters in a
Well, when
row.
the pattern stays cold, it stays cold, right? But you get these
Yeah,
big
yeah,
storms that
that's
come
true.
from temperature swings, and that's exactly what happened in 1888. Now, granted, this is the 1800s, so if you thought we didn't have much back then in the day, I mean, 1800s we had nothing, just weather charts and thermometers and barometers and no big weather models, no satellite, any of that. So what happened was March 12th, temperatures dropped, so it did cool into the 30s from previous days of being mild, but it dropped from the 30s Fahrenheit into the single digits. And it actually started out as rain, if you can believe it. It was a rain to heavy snow event. And it continued all the way through. This was March 12th, all the way through into the 13th. And it just continued to just pummel snow across the Northeast. Estimates for snowfall range anywhere from like 30 to 50 inches of snow from New York City to like Massachusetts and Connecticut. Um, Even Vermont got like 20 inches of snow up there. So it was a pretty big snowstorm across the Northeast. But what was more important was that this was a blizzard, so winds were whipping. The highest official report in New York City was 40 miles per hour, although there were some unconfirmed reports of 80-mile-an-hour wind
Oh my
gusts.
gosh.
Yeah, I could imagine. I mean, back then it was hard to measure wind, I'm sure.
So based on that, you can imagine what the drifts were like. Actually, they were up to 40 feet,
Whew.
up to people's houses. Yes. The highest drift was recorded in Gravesend, Brooklyn, at 52 feet.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
And that's not plow-driven drifts
No,
either.
that is wind.
Because there were no plows back then.
So honestly, one of the most insane, and if we had that today, can you imagine a 50-foot drift today? I mean, I can't imagine it myself. It'd be almost like, it would almost look apocalyptic. 50 feet of snow. You wouldn't be able to like dig. I mean, if you remember the big snow piles in Boston after their big year of snow, think of that. Maybe not as,
The garbage pile of snow, yeah.
that's kind of what you're dealing with drifts. But again, what was very interesting about this was that, again, March 13th, New York City recorded a low of 6 degrees Fahrenheit, which was the coldest in the winter season. In the whole winter season, it came in March.
Oh, God, it took all the way till
The
March.
high only got to 12 that day. Only 12 degrees in March, which is insane for March standards. And as you can imagine, it crippled the city. At the time, there was rail, and the railways were pretty much impassable for days. The subway was closed, the subway at that time was very, very early in its infancy. So you can imagine too. The stock exchange was also closed as well. At that point, there weren't any telephones, but there were telegraphs. And that was right before the invention of the telephone. And the telegraph lines were, as you can imagine, all pretty much disabled. So communication was cut off for days. Fire stations and pretty much police stations were pretty much immobilized. So any sort of fires or anything that happened afterwards were not able to be taken care of because, well, they couldn't get to you. But a big thing that was a big problem with this storm was the temperature. And it caused, unfortunately, a lot of deaths because of the cold. Over 400 people lost their life, with 200 of them
gosh.
happening in New York City. 200 people because they couldn't stay warm. Back then, you had to kind of adapt, but it was so fast and so sudden they couldn't get. And again, you're in the single digits. We're not talking like 30 or 40. We're talking below freezing. This is below freezing. So it's pretty incredible, unfortunately, to what happened with this storm. But it's one of the biggest storms of pretty much recorded history, at least across the United States, for what we know. But yeah, I mean, if that happened today, I can't imagine at all.
And I'm sure a lot of those estimates are, I mean, it was hard to measure back then. I mean, get, really good, precise measurements, especially with the wind blowing and going back, that late. And
Yeah, although we do have pictures, so at least that's a good thing. We could see the drifts, we could see the snow, so it's not like they were like lying. Oh yeah, I got a 40-foot drift at my house. It's like, no, there's pictures of it, and it's kind of hard to fake that from the 1800s. But yeah, if that happened today, who knows?
yeah, I know. And March is a, like I said earlier, it's a very volatile month. You can have temperatures in the 60s and 70s, and a couple of days later dealing with a blizzard. And I'll tell you, 2018, we kind of mentioned a minute ago when we had the 4 nor'easters. That was very memorable. It's hard to get 1 or 2 nor'easters in March, but let alone 4. It was like 4 weeks in a row. I remember working that whole month, and it was nonstop. It was crazy. The storms were just. I think, Mike, you remember those, right? You were there in 2018.
Oh yes.
Yeah, I mean, it was just constant
Constant snow, yeah.
forecasting, and I mean, it was busy, busy, busy. The phones were ringing off the hook the whole month. So, and then we'll finish things up here with a couple of April storms. I'm not going to get into too much detail, but one that you may want to look up was 1982, April 6th and 7th. This was actually a blizzard that affected New York City, and it pretty much shut down the city for a day or two.
And in April to do that, that's a big deal.
Yeah, and they already had a couple of days of nice weather, but up to 15 inches of snow fell, across a good portion of uh, New York City and Western Connecticut. Right, basically I-95 and north and west, saw the highest amounts, but it was just a storm that people weren't expecting that late in the year. Um, and then one other one a year later, believe it or not. Now this one was a real interior system, but there was another storm that produced about a foot of snow from into eastern Pennsylvania, going through northern New Jersey into the Catskills and a good portion of New England. That was on April 18th and 19th in 1983. So not only was it a year later, but 2 weeks later than the first one happened in 1982. So it can snow in April. We've seen it happen, but when you get a foot of snow in April, it's like, come on, it's supposed to be spring here. And I guess we'll finish it off when an honorable mention one. I kind of looked this one up at the very last minute, but it did snow as late as May 18th, 2002. Now, there's always been mentions of flurries and things like that, even into June. Of course, in the highest elevations, you can get some kind of weird random setup. But this was an accumulating snow that brought with it 2.2 inches fell at Albany at the airport. But in the Catskills, some areas saw 4 to 8, 9 inches of snow.
I'm like in summer mode by that point.
May 18th, yeah, 2002. And it was a storm that came up through the Tennessee Valley, and it kind of cut up through the Mid-Atlantic, not off the coast where you would think you get snow for the eastern seaboard, but it was just inland enough where it was rain for the major cities, but right there in the elevations where there was some decent precipitation rates, it changed over to snow, and voila, you get a snowstorm in May. So
Yeah, that's crazy.
yeah, we don't need to see that
No,
anytime
thank
this
you.
year. So March is fine. Snow through March. After that, I'm pretty much done.
I'm good through February, honestly. But
Yeah, I
Mike's
guess,
like,
yeah.
March 1st, I'm done.
nah, March 1st. That's the meteorological spring day, so
Yeah.
I'm checked out.
Yeah,
out.
yeah, you're right.
I'm out.
But of course, we'll continue to monitor the rest of this winter. We'll have a recap of how things went this year, and think snow all the way until the end of February for Mike, and then that's it.
You know it, Brad. You know it.
All right, well, I think that'll do it for us. We'll of course keep an eye on things here over the last couple of months of winter across the Northeast. And you can always check us out at weatherworksinc.com, and you can follow us on all the big social media platforms. That'll do it for today's episode here in the Weather Lounge. And of course, subscribe to the Weather Lounge, and you'll get notified when the newest podcast drop. Until then, we'll see you.
That's a wrap on this week's episode of the Weather Lounge podcast. Thanks for listening. Be sure to follow us on all your favorite podcasting platforms so you don't miss out on future episodes. Have questions or comments? Just email us at weatherlounge@weatherworksinc.com. We'd love to hear your feedback. You can also learn more about our parent company, WeatherWorks, by visiting weatherworksinc.com and checking them out on social media as well. Thanks again for joining us, and until next time, stay curious and stay weather-wise.